In this video, we will talk about multiple congenital abnormalities. As we have discussed in our previous video, that multiple congenital abnormalities are classified as syndrome and sequence. In syndrome, a single underlying cause leads to groups of abnormalities. For example, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, these are groups of abnormalities that consistently occur together.
Ma'am, can I give an example of syndrome?
Yes, sure.
For example, Down syndrome due to trisomy 21, which means chromosome 21 having an extra copy. This trisomy 21 is single underlying cause. It leads to groups of anomalies, such as flat facial profile, Brushfield spots, epicanthal fold, clinodactyly. Clinodactyly means that your child has a finger that curves to one side. It usually affects the little finger, but can affect other fingers as well. It is typically caused by abnormal growth and development of the small bones of the finger. Brachydactyly. Brachydactyly means short digits and is a general term to identify fingers and toes that are shorter than normal. Brachydactyly is a genetic condition, and it happens because of a gene mutation that affects bone growth. And single transverse palmar crease.
Okay, class. Other points you need to remember in syndrome are that etiology of syndrome are chromosomal, genetic, teratogenic, and unknown. All of these are primary anomaly. Other multiple congenital abnormality is the sequence. Well, class, sequences are cascades of events.
Ma'am, I cannot understand it.
Okay, let me simplify it for you. Sequences are cascades of events. It means A leads to B, and B leads to C, and C leads to D. But if B is absent, C cannot occur. And ultimately, D can also not occur. Points you need to remember about sequence are: sequence is resulting from single primary anomaly that have been discussed in syndrome, which are chromosomal, genetic, teratogenic, and unknown. Sequence is also resulting from intrinsic cause, that is, malformation, and also from extrinsic cause. Can anyone recall the extrinsic causes? Yes, ma'am. That were deformation and disruption. So, malformation, deformation, and disruption. That leads to secondary anomaly. Any student who can repeat the definition of syndrome and sequence for us?
Yes, ma'am. In syndrome, a single underlying cause leads to groups of abnormalities. For example, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, all of these are groups of abnormalities that consistently occur together. Next is the sequence. Well, sequences are cascades of events. It means A leads to B, and B leads to C, and C leads to D. But if B is absent, C cannot occur. And ultimately, D can also not occur.
Yes, you are right.
Ma'am, can you make a comparison using an example of syndrome and sequence between syndrome and sequence so that we have better understanding?
Yes, sure. we are taking of Tarr syndrome, which is an example of syndrome, and Robin sequence, which is an example of sequence. Now, this is the patient of Tarr syndrome. And we have discussed that single underlying cause leads to groups of anomalies that consistently occur together. So, groups of abnormalities that occur in Tarr syndrome are two, which are thrombocytopenia, which means absent or defective megakaryocytes, and absent radius, as this is ulnar and this is humerus, but radius is absent.
T in Tarr syndrome stands for thrombocytopenia. A and R in Tarr syndrome stands for absent radius. That is why it is called as Tarr syndrome, due to thrombocytopenia and absent radius.
Now, moving towards Robin sequence. Now, John, you tell me. What's the sequence?
Well, ma'am, sequences are cascades of events. It means F leads to B and B leads to C and C leads to D.
Exactly, John. So, this is typical Robin facies with micrognathia. Micrognathia is when the lower jaw is smaller than normal. In some cases, this can cause problems with feeding, breathing and sleeping. So, in case of Robin sequence, hyperplastic mandible, that causes glossoptosis, that causes tongue obstructs, and palatal fusion, and then U-shaped palate.
Yes, ma'am. The events are occurring in a sequence, such as I, B, C and then D. That's why it is called as Robin sequence.
Yes, you are right.
Ma'am, can I ask a question that's rooming in my mind?
Yes, sure.
Is there any example that involves all of three abnormalities, such as malformation, disruption, and deformation?
And will it be a syndrome or sequence?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, Jenny, I can quote an example that involves all of these three abnormalities, which is called as Potter sequence. Let's discuss the events in Potter sequence. Amniotic rupture causes amniotic fluid loss, and renal agenesis causes decreased amniotic fluid production. Renal agenesis is a complete absence of one or both kidneys. Amniotic rupture and renal agenesis both cause oligohydramnios. Oligohydramnios is a decreased amount of amniotic fluid. That leads to Potter facies. Potter facies is described as having a flattened nose, recessed chin, prominent epicanthial folds, and low set of abnormal ears. Fetal growth deficiency. Pulmonary hyperplasia. Pulmonary hyperplasia is a condition in which the lungs are abnormally small and do not have enough tissue and blood flow to allow the baby to breathe on his or her own. This can be a life-threatening condition. Breech position. A breech position is when your baby is lying bottom down in your uterus. And limb position defects. Now, class, pay attention. Renal agenesis classes as a malformation. And amniotic rupture classes as a disruption, which through oligohydramnios causes deformation. And the series of events, a sequence.
Oh, ma'am. As we have discussed that sequence occurs as series of events, such as A leads to B, That leads to C.
Thank you for watching. Stay connected with sqadia.com to access an abundance of precise and knowledge-packed videos. We look forward to providing you with even more valuable content in the future.
Have you ever heard of video books? sqadia.com is delighted to present video books, medical books, that have been tailored into a series of videos. sqadia.com videos are presented in the same order as the book's chapters. Explore now and make your learning easy.